My name is Claire Whitmore, and the day my father removed me from his will, 32 people applauded. Some even smiled. A few raised their glasses. My younger brother actually laughed. And for a moment, sitting at the far end of that dining table, I honestly thought they were celebrating the worst day of my life. What none of them knew, what my father didn't know, was that the lawyer sitting quietly near the fireplace hadn't touched his drink all evening. And 24 hours later, he was going to say 7 words that would destroy everything my family thought they knew. But before I tell you what happened that night, you need to understand something about my father. My father loved control more than he loved people. Not money, not success, control. Money was simply the tool he used to get it. Growing up, my brother Ethan and I learned that lesson early. Ethan was rewarded. I was evaluated. Every achievement became a test. Every success became a challenge. Every mistake became a family discussion. When I graduated at the top of my class, my father asked why I wasn't valedictorian. When I bought my first home at 29, he asked why the neighborhood wasn't better. When my business crossed 7 figures, he asked if it was sustainable. Nothing was ever enough, especially from me. For years, I convinced myself that if I worked harder, earned more, proved myself often enough, eventually he would look at me and see a daughter instead of a disappointment. I was wrong. The truth arrived on a cold Thursday afternoon. My father's assistant called me. Not my father, his assistant. That alone should have warned me. Mr. Whitmore would like the family present Saturday evening. I frowned. For what? There was a pause. Then she answered carefully, "A family announcement." That's all she said. No details, no explanation, just an invitation that felt more like a summons. The second I hung up, my stomach tightened. Because in my family, surprise announcements were never good news. They were performances, and someone usually left embarrassed. That evening, I called my grandmother. At 82, she was the only person in the family who still spoke honestly. After I explained the invitation, she became unusually quiet. "Grandma," another pause, then she sighed. "Claire, just listen more than you talk on Saturday." A chill ran through me. What does that mean? But she changed the subject immediately, and that was the moment I knew something was wrong. Very wrong. I just didn't know yet that my father had spent months planning a public humiliation, or that someone else had spent years preparing for it to fail. And when those 2 plans finally collided, only one of them survived. Saturday arrived cold and gray, the kind of day where the sky looks heavy, the kind of day that feels like a warning. I pulled into my father's driveway just before 6. His house sat at the top of a small hill overlooking the lake. 3 stories, stone exterior, perfect landscaping, everything designed to tell the world one thing. The Whitmore family had money, or at least that was the story my father wanted everyone to believe. Cars already filled the driveway. My aunt's Mercedes, my uncle's truck, my cousin's SUV. Almost everyone was there. As I walked toward the front door, I noticed something strange. People kept looking at me, then quickly looking away, like they knew something I didn't. My Aunt Linda greeted me first. She hugged me tighter than usual. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Holding up? The question hit me like a pebble against glass. "Fine," I said carefully. She forced a smile. "Good, good." Then she disappeared into the crowd before I could ask what she meant. The knot in my stomach tightened. Inside, the house buzzed with conversation. Champagne glasses, laughter, music. But underneath it all was something else. Expectation. Like everyone was waiting for a show to begin. I spotted my brother Ethan near the fireplace. He looked happier than I'd seen him in years. His expensive watch flashed every time he moved his hand. His smile never left his face. And standing beside him was Rebecca, his wife. She wasn't even trying to hide her excitement. Every few minutes she whispered something into Ethan's ear and both of them laughed. Then I noticed someone else, Martin Hayes, the family lawyer. For over 20 years, Martin had handled every legal matter connected to my father: trusts, properties, business contracts, everything. Normally, Martin was relaxed at family gatherings. Tonight, he looked uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. He stood alone near the fireplace, holding a glass he never drank from, watching people the way a doctor watches a patient before delivering bad news. The second our eyes met, something changed. He gave me a small nod, not friendly, not casual, concerned, a warning disguised as a greeting. And suddenly, my grandmother's words came rushing back. "Listen more than you talk." At exactly 7 o'clock, my father tapped a spoon against his glass. The room went silent. Conversation stopped. Chairs turned. Every eye moved toward him. My father loved moments like this, loved being the center of attention. He stood beside the fireplace, smiling like a king addressing his court. "Thank you all for coming." The room answered with polite applause. Then he looked directly at Ethan, and Ethan's smile grew wider, much wider. That's when I knew. Whatever was about to happen, my brother already knew about it, and I didn't. My father raised his glass. "I've made an important decision about the future of this family." The room leaned forward. Even the air felt different, heavy, waiting. Then my father said the sentence that changed everything. "As of this week, Claire has been permanently removed from my will." For 1 second, nobody moved, nobody breathed, and then the room exploded. The applause started slowly. Then it spread across the room. A few relatives clapped politely. Others exchanged surprised looks. But what hurt wasn't the announcement. It was realizing how many people already knew. I saw it immediately. The sideways glances, the awkward smiles, the fake sympathy. They weren't shocked. They were watching me, waiting to see how I'd react, like I was the final act of a show they'd already paid to see. My father stood proudly beside the fireplace, his glass raised, his smile calm, satisfied, as if he'd just corrected a mistake instead of disowning his daughter in front of half the family. I looked at Ethan. His expression told me everything. No surprise, no confusion, no concern. Only victory. The kind of smile people wear when they've already counted money that isn't in their pocket yet. Then he made a mistake, a very expensive mistake. He laughed, not loudly, just enough. And when he noticed me looking at him, he shrugged. "You can't say Dad didn't warn you." The room went quiet again. Several relatives turned toward him, because that sentence revealed something. You can't say Dad didn't warn you. Warn me? My father hadn't warned me. I hadn't known anything, which meant Ethan had. For how long? Weeks? Months? My father slowly lowered his glass. The smile faded slightly. He realized what Ethan had just exposed, but it was too late. The truth was already sitting in the middle of the room. This wasn't a family decision. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't emotional. It was planned. Every detail, every guest, every seat, every speech, months of preparation. And somehow I was the only person who hadn't received the script. My Aunt Linda looked away. My uncle suddenly became interested in his drink. Nobody wanted eye contact, because eye contact creates responsibility, and responsibility was the one thing nobody wanted that night. Then my father cleared his throat. "I didn't do this lightly." That sentence almost made me laugh. People only say they didn't do something lightly when they absolutely did. I've spent years evaluating what is best for this family. Evaluating, not loving, not supporting. Evaluating, like we were investments, like we were numbers on a spreadsheet. My father continued, "Ethan has proven he understands responsibility." Ethan straightened his shoulders, almost proudly. "As for Claire," he paused, dramatic, calculated, cruel. "As for Claire, Certain choices have consequences. A murmur moved through the room. I stared at him. What choices? For the first time all evening, I spoke. The room instantly froze. My father smiled. Not warmly, the way a hunter smiles when the trap finally moves. You know exactly what choices. Actually, I didn't, and that's when something interesting happened. The family lawyer looked down. Not at me, not at my father, at the floor, as if he physically couldn't watch what was happening. That caught my attention immediately, because Martin Hayes wasn't emotional. 20 years as a lawyer had trained that out of him, yet tonight he looked uncomfortable, guilty even, as though he knew something nobody else knew, something important, something dangerous. My father kept talking, but honestly, I barely heard him anymore, because for the first time all night my attention wasn't on my father, it was on the lawyer, and every instinct I had was suddenly screaming the same thing. Martin Hayes wasn't worried about me being removed from the will. He was worried about what would happen after, and that terrified me. Because lawyers only get nervous when facts are involved, and facts don't care who gets embarrassed. They only care who's right and who isn't. The room stayed silent, not the comfortable kind of silence, the dangerous kind. The kind that appears when people realize they're hearing something they probably shouldn't. My father stood near the fireplace, still holding his glass, still trying to look in control. But something had changed. The speech wasn't landing the way he'd imagined. People weren't celebrating anymore. They were watching. And there is a huge difference. I slowly stood from my chair. "Let's make this simple," I said. My voice surprised even me. Calm, steady. No anger, no tears, nothing my father could use against me. What exactly did I do? My father laughed. A short laugh, the kind people use when they think a question is beneath them. "You're serious?" "Very." He looked around the room, searching for support, finding less than before. Then he finally said it. "You never respected this family." The statement hung there, empty, meaningless. I folded my arms. "Give me one example." Nothing. Just silence. My father opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "You've always thought you were better than us." There it was. The real accusation. Not theft, not betrayal, not dishonesty, success. That was my crime. I built a business. I bought my own home. I stopped asking permission. And somewhere along the way, my father decided independence was disrespect. Across the room, Ethan suddenly stepped forward. A mistake. Greedy people always make one extra move. "You don't need examples," he said. "The decision is already made." I turned toward him. "And you're happy about that?" His answer came too fast. "Why wouldn't I be?" The room shifted again, because now everyone heard it. The excitement, the expectation, the reason Ethan had been smiling all night. This wasn't about family values. This wasn't about principles. This was about inheritance, money, assets, property. And Ethan wasn't even pretending otherwise anymore. My grandmother slowly shook her head, disappointed, not surprised, just disappointed. Then Ethan made his second mistake, the bigger one. "You've had years to prove yourself." Years. Interesting word. I looked directly at him. "How long have you known?" His confidence cracked, just a little, but enough, and everyone saw it. "Ethan?" I repeated. "How long?" He glanced toward my father. The answer was written all over his face. Months, maybe longer. The entire thing had been planned, discussed, prepared. While family dinners continued, while holidays came and went, while people smiled at me across tables, the decision had already been made. I just hadn't been informed. Then, from across the room, a quiet voice spoke. "Claire." Martin Hayes, the lawyer. Every head turned, because he hadn't said a word all evening. Not one. He carefully set his untouched glass on a side table, then looked directly at me. Not my father. Me. And the expression on his face made my stomach drop. because it wasn't pity. It was concern. Real concern. The kind professionals show when they know a train is coming and nobody else has heard the whistle. "May I speak with you privately for a moment?" The room froze. My father immediately frowned. "Whatever needs saying can be said here." Martin ignored him completely. A first. In 20 years, I had never seen anyone ignore my father, especially not Martin Hayes. The lawyer held my gaze and quietly repeated himself. "Claire, this concerns your grandfather." My heart stopped. For one terrifying second, everything disappeared. The room, the guests, the argument, all of it. Because my grandfather had been gone for 7 years, and Martin Hayes had just said his name like he wasn't finished speaking. Then the lawyer reached into his briefcase, pulled out a sealed envelope, and looked directly at me. "You need to see this before anyone says another word." Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The room felt frozen. Martin Hayes stood holding the envelope. My father looked irritated. Ethan looked confused. But me? I couldn't stop staring at my grandfather's name written across the front. The handwriting was unmistakable. Even after 7 years, even after all this time. I knew those letters. Because when I was a little girl, my grandfather used to leave notes in my lunchbox. Tiny messages. Work hard. Stay honest. Be brave. Simple things. But he always signed them the same way, and the signature on that envelope was his. My hands felt strangely cold as I reached for it. "What is this?" I asked. Martin's answer was careful. "It's something your grandfather instructed me to deliver only if certain events occurred." A murmur moved through the room. My father stepped forward immediately. "What events?" Martin didn't even look at him. Instead, he looked at me. "Open it." So I did. Inside was a folded letter and another document. Thicker. Official. Legal. But the letter came first. I unfolded it slowly. My grandfather's handwriting covered the page. The moment I saw it, my chest tightened, because it felt like hearing his voice again. The room disappeared, and for a few seconds, it was just me and him. The first line read, "If you're reading this, your father has finally done exactly what I feared he would." The room went completely silent. I kept reading. "Your father mistakes control for strength. He mistakes obedience for love. And one day, he will try to use inheritance as a weapon. When that day comes, I need you to know the truth." My eyes stopped moving. The truth? What truth? I turned the page, and everything changed. Your father was never meant to inherit the Whitmore estate, not permanently, only temporarily. My breathing slowed. I read the sentence again, then a third time. Across the room, my father had gone pale, very pale, like he already knew what came next, and that terrified him. The letter continued. "The majority of my estate was placed into a protected trust 6 months before my death. The trustee was instructed to transfer control to the grandchild I believe demonstrated the greatest judgment, integrity, and responsibility. For years, I observed all of you carefully. The choice was clear. Claire, that person was you." The room exploded. Gasps, questions, people talking over each other. My aunt literally dropped her glass. Ethan looked like someone had punched him, but nobody looked worse than my father, because he wasn't shocked. He wasn't confused. He wasn't surprised. He looked caught. And suddenly I understood something. My father already knew, or at least he knew enough. Martin raised his hand. "Everyone needs to remain quiet." The room settled slightly. Then he pointed toward the second document inside the envelope. "The letter isn't the important part." Every head turned, including mine. "The trust documents are." My stomach dropped. Because if the letter was only the introduction, then whatever came next was much bigger. Much, much bigger. And judging by the expression on my father's face, he'd spent years hoping nobody would ever see it. The room felt smaller now, like the walls themselves were listening. Martin Hayes opened the second document and carefully laid it on the dining table. Nobody touched it. Nobody spoke. Even Ethan looked afraid. Not confused, afraid. Because deep down, everyone understood something. This wasn't about a will anymore. This was about a secret. And secrets are always more expensive than money. Martin adjusted his glasses, then pointed to the first page. 7 years ago, shortly before your grandfather passed away, he created the Whitmore Family Trust. My father immediately interrupted. That trust was for estate taxes. Martin looked at him, the same way a teacher looks at a student who just lied while holding the answer sheet. No, Gordon. The room froze. Martin rarely used my father's first name. That is not what the trust was for. My father looked away. That told me everything. He knew. Maybe not all of it, but enough. Martin continued. The trust contains the lake house, the investment accounts, the commercial properties, and the majority of Mr. Whitmore's remaining assets. Aunt Linda gasped. One of my cousins whispered, "The commercial properties too?" Martin nodded. All of them. The room erupted again, because suddenly everyone understood what was happening. My father hadn't removed me from the inheritance. He had removed me from his inheritance. A very different thing. And judging by the documents on the table, his inheritance wasn't the important one. I slowly sat down, trying to process everything. My grandfather's lake house, the properties, the investments, all of it. Inside a trust nobody had mentioned for 7 years. Then Martin turned another page and said something that changed the atmosphere completely. The trust contains performance conditions. My father closed his eyes, just for a second. A tiny movement. But I saw it, and so did everyone else. Performance conditions. Meaning somebody had to earn control. My heart started pounding. Martin looked directly at me. Your grandfather instructed us to review all beneficiaries every 3 years. The room became silent again. The dangerous kind of silence, the kind before impact. Then Martin said, "Claire consistently ranked first." Nobody breathed. Ethan's face drained of color. My aunt sat down hard. My mother covered her mouth. And my father looked like he wanted the floor to open beneath him. Martin kept reading. Integrity, financial responsibility, business judgment, character under pressure. Every category, every review, the same result. Claire Whitmore, Claire Whitmore, Claire Whitmore. For 7 years. My grandfather had been evaluating all of us from beyond the grave through the trust structure he created, and every review reached the same conclusion. The person my father respected least was the person his own father trusted most. Then something unexpected happened. My father stood up. Hard, fast, violently enough to shake the table. "No!" The word exploded out of him. "No! This is ridiculous. This is manipulation." He pointed directly at Martin, then at me, then at the documents. His control was slipping, and everyone could see it. For the first time in my entire life. My father looked scared, not angry, scared, because the story he'd spent years telling was collapsing in front of witnesses. And the worst part? The lawyer wasn't finished, not even close. Martin slowly turned to the final section of the trust, the section my father clearly hoped nobody would ever read. Then he looked up and quietly said, "There's one more provision." The room held its breath. "What provision?" Ethan asked. Martin looked directly at him, then at me, then at my father, and finally spoke. "The controlling beneficiary became active 6 months ago." I frowned. "What does that mean?" Martin slid the final page across the table, toward me, then smiled for the first time all night. "It means, Claire, you already own everything." For a few seconds nobody moved, nobody blinked, nobody even seemed to breathe. The words hung over the room like thunder. "You already own everything." I stared at Martin, then at the document, then back at Martin. "Everything?" I asked. My voice barely sounded like mine. Martin nodded. 6 months ago, the final performance review was completed. He pointed to the trust papers. The transfer was executed immediately afterward. The room remained frozen. My father looked as if someone had drained every drop of blood from his body. Ethan's face was even worse, because unlike my father, Ethan hadn't spent years hiding the truth. He'd spent years expecting a payday, and now he was realizing there wasn't one, at least not for him. "What exactly does everything mean?" my aunt asked quietly. Martin answered without hesitation. "The lake house, the investment portfolio, the commercial properties, the trust reserves, the voting control of the family companies." Each item landed harder than the one before. The family companies. That one changed everything, because those companies were the foundation of the Whitmore name, the source of the family's status, the reason my father had spent decades acting like a king, and now everyone was learning he wasn't sitting on the throne anymore. I was. The realization rolled across the room one face at a time: shock, confusion, disbelief, then panic. Ethan stood abruptly. "This is insane." Nobody answered. "This can't be legal." Martin smiled politely. "It is. My father controls those companies." "No." Martin's voice remained calm. "Your grandfather controlled them. He placed them inside the trust." The silence that followed felt endless. Then Ethan turned toward me, and for the first time in his life, he looked nervous around me. Really nervous, because he suddenly understood something. The inheritance he'd been celebrating 24 hours ago never existed, at least not the way he'd imagined. Everything he thought was coming to him already belonged to someone else. Me. Then my father spoke, his voice quieter than before, dangerously quiet. "Claire." The room turned, because nobody had heard that tone from him before. No arrogance, no authority, no performance, just desperation. "Claire, let's talk privately." A few relatives exchanged looks, because they understood exactly what was happening. The man who had publicly removed me from his will yesterday wanted a private conversation today. Funny how quickly power changes people's preferences. I shook my head. "No." His jaw tightened. "Please." The word shocked the room. I honestly think it shocked him, too. My father didn't say please, ever, but now he was. Because for the first time, he wasn't negotiating from strength. He was negotiating from weakness, and he hated it. Then Martin slid one final page across the table. "I think everyone should see this before further discussion." My father immediately went pale, much paler than before, which caught my attention, because I hadn't thought that was possible. "What is it?" I asked. Martin looked directly at me. "It's the conduct clause." The room frowned collectively. Nobody knew what that meant, except my father. He knew, and judging by his expression, he wished he didn't. Martin tapped the page. "Your grandfather anticipated the possibility of family manipulation." The room became silent again. Therefore, he included a provision. My heart started pounding. "What provision?" Martin adjusted his glasses, then read directly from the document. "If any beneficiary attempts to threaten, pressure, publicly humiliate, or financially manipulate another family member for personal gain." He paused, then continued. "Their discretionary benefits may be immediately suspended by the controlling beneficiary." The room exploded. My aunt gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" Ethan stumbled backward. And my father. My father slowly sat down, because for the first time, he understood what everyone else had just realized. The person he humiliated yesterday now held the power to decide his future. and the trust gave her every legal right to act. The question wasn't whether I could. The question was whether I would. Nobody spoke. The conduct clause sat on the table like a loaded weapon, and everyone in the room knew exactly who it was pointed at: my father. For years, he'd controlled every conversation, every holiday, every family gathering, every decision. But now the balance had shifted. Not because I yelled louder, not because I won an argument, because a piece of paper had finally told the truth. Martin quietly pushed the document toward me. "Under the trust terms," he said, "the decision is entirely yours." I looked down at the page. One signature. That was all it would take. One signature and my father's discretionary payments from the trust would stop immediately. No monthly distributions, no access to trust resources, nothing. Completely legal, completely enforceable. The room waited. My father stared at the table, not at me, not at anyone. The table. As if looking anywhere else would make this real. For the first time in my life, I had absolute leverage. The kind of leverage he'd always had over me. The kind he'd enjoyed. The kind he'd used. And now it was mine. Funny thing about power. You spend years thinking you'll know exactly what to do with it when it finally arrives. Then it arrives, and suddenly nothing feels simple anymore. Martin remained silent, letting me think. The room remained silent too, until my father finally spoke. His voice sounded older, smaller, like something inside him had cracked. "You want to know why?" Everyone looked up, including me. He laughed once, a dry laugh with no humor in it. "You want to know why I treated you differently?" Nobody answered, because for once, nobody needed to. He looked directly at me, and for the first time in decades, he told the truth. "When you were 16, your grandfather started comparing me to you." The room froze. My stomach tightened. "What?" My father nodded slowly. "Every year. He talked about your grades, your discipline, your work ethic." His eyes drifted toward the trust documents, and eventually he started talking about succession. The realization hit me before he said it. No, not possible. Then he confirmed it. "He thought you should run the company someday." The room went silent again, a different silence, a painful one, because suddenly the puzzle pieces fit together. The criticism, the jokes, the dismissals, the impossible standards, the constant need to make me smaller. None of it had started because I was weak. It started because I was strong. Strong enough to threaten his position, strong enough to trigger his insecurity, strong enough that his own father saw something in me that he didn't see in him. My father rubbed his face, looking exhausted. I hated it. The honesty shocked everyone, including him. "I hated hearing your name." He swallowed hard. "Every compliment you got felt like criticism of me." Nobody moved, nobody interrupted, because some truths only arrive once, and if you interrupt them, you lose them forever. He looked down. "I know how pathetic that sounds." No one argued. Then he looked at me again, and there was no anger left, no pride, no performance, just regret. Raw regret. "I spent 20 years trying to win a competition you didn't even know existed." The words hit harder than anything else he'd said, because they felt true, terribly true, and suddenly I understood something, not forgiven, understood. There is a difference. My father hadn't spent years attacking me because I failed. He spent years attacking me because he was afraid. Afraid of comparison, afraid of losing status, afraid of being measured, afraid of being seen. And fear has a way of becoming cruelty when it sits inside someone long enough. Martin broke the silence softly. "Claire." I looked up. "The decision?" The room turned toward me, every eye, every face, waiting, watching. The moment had arrived. Revenge, mercy, punishment, grace. Years of pain balanced on one choice. I looked at the signature line, then at my father, then at the trust papers, then finally at my grandfather's letter. One sentence stood out immediately, a sentence I'd almost forgotten. The person with power is revealed by what they do when they no longer need revenge. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. Martin blinked. My father looked confused. Everyone did. "I'm not signing it." The room erupted. "What? Claire? Why?" Even Ethan looked stunned. I stood slowly, then looked directly at my father. "You don't lose because I punish you." I paused. "You lose because the truth is finally visible." Nobody spoke. "You'll keep your distributions. You'll keep your benefits. You'll keep everything the trust allows." My father stared at me, unable to process it. Then I took a breath and delivered the one condition that mattered. "But from today forward, every family interaction happens on equal terms." The room went silent. Again. "If you insult me, I leave. If you manipulate me, I leave. If you try to control me, I leave." I looked around the room, at everyone, not just him, everyone. "And when I leave, I don't come back." Nobody moved, because they understood. This wasn't a threat. It was a boundary. The first real boundary I'd ever drawn. And somehow, that scared them more than punishment ever could. Then I picked up my coat, looked once more at my grandfather's letter, and smiled, because for the first time since entering that house, I felt free. Not powerful, not victorious. Free. And that was worth more than any inheritance. 6 months later, life looked very different. Not dramatically, not overnight. Real life rarely works that way. The biggest changes happen quietly, the way the most important changes always do. The first surprise was Ethan. For years, he'd lived like success was inevitable, like wealth was something that happened automatically if you were born into the right family. The trust changed that, not because it punished him, because it stopped protecting him. Without the assumption of a future payout, Ethan finally had to make decisions the way everyone else did. Consequences attached. For the first time in his life, he got serious. He took a management position in one of the family companies, started showing up early, started asking questions, started listening. Nobody trusted it at first, including me. But 6 months later, he was still there, still working, still learning. Turns out some people don't need rescuing. They need reality. My aunt later called it a miracle. I called it accountability. As for the family, the holidays became quieter, smaller, healthier. Amazing what happens when people realize public humiliation is no longer part of the entertainment schedule. The old jokes disappeared. The little insults disappeared. The casual cruelty disappeared. Not completely. Families don't transform overnight, but enough. Enough to notice. Enough to breathe. Enough to make showing up feel different. Then there was my father. The question everyone asked, did he change? The answer is complicated because people don't suddenly become different at 70 years old. Not really, but they can become more honest. And that's what happened. The first few months were awkward, painfully awkward. Every conversation felt like walking across thin ice. Neither of us knew the rules anymore. For decades, our relationship had been built on one thing, his authority. Now that authority was gone, and neither of us knew what came next. Then one afternoon in late autumn, my phone rang. His name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer. Almost. But I did. "Hello?" A long pause. Then his voice. "Can you come by?" No explanation. Just that. "Can you come by?" 3 words that somehow sounded heavier than all the speeches he'd ever given. So I drove to the lake house. The original one. The place my grandfather loved most. The place where he'd taught me how to fish, how to drive a boat, how to keep promises. The leaves had already turned gold. The water looked like glass. And my father was sitting alone on the dock, hands folded, staring out at the lake. older than I'd ever seen him. I sat beside him. Neither of us spoke for a while. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just honest. Finally, he handed me something. A small wooden box. Weathered. Old. I opened it. Inside was a pocket watch, my grandfather's. The watch he carried every day for nearly 40 years. I looked at my father. He kept staring at the water. He wanted you to have it. I swallowed. Why didn't he give it to me? A sad smile crossed his face. He did. I frowned. What? My father laughed softly, the kind of laugh people make when they're finally tired of carrying something. He left instructions. My chest tightened. Of course he did. He said you'd get it when I was ready to stop competing with you. The lake suddenly seemed very quiet. I stared at the watch, unable to speak. My father nodded slowly. I kept it longer than I should have. Years longer. The admission hurt, but strangely, it also healed something, because it was finally true. No excuses, no blame, no performance, just truth. The thing we'd both needed all along. The sun started dropping toward the horizon, painting the water gold, and for a long time neither of us said anything. Then finally my father spoke. I read his letter. I looked over. The whole thing. He nodded, twice. A long pause, then, he was right about you. The words hit harder than any apology could have, because they cost him something. Real apologies always do. I looked back toward the water and smiled, not because everything was fixed. It wasn't, not even close. Some damage doesn't disappear, some wounds become scars, and scars stay, but scars are different from open wounds. They don't control you anymore. The sun touched the horizon, the lake turned orange, and my father quietly asked the question that had haunted him for years. Why did he choose you? I looked at the water, then at the pocket watch in my hand, and finally answered, because Grandpa never cared who wanted power. I smiled softly. He cared who could live without it. My father lowered his eyes, and for once, he didn't argue. We sat there until sunset. Two people who had spent decades standing on opposite sides of a battle that only one of them knew existed. The funny thing about inheritance is that people think it's about money. It's not. Money is easy. Money gets counted, transferred, spent. The real inheritance is character, the habits people leave behind, the values that survive after they're gone. My grandfather understood that. That's why he didn't leave me wealth. He left me responsibility. And responsibility, unlike money, can never be taken away by a signature on a piece of paper. A month later, I placed the pocket watch in my office, not inside a safe, not behind glass, right on my desk, where I could see it every day, a reminder, not of what I inherited, but of what I chose, because the most important moment wasn't when my father removed me from his will, and it wasn't when the lawyer revealed the truth. It wasn't even when I gained control of the trust. The most important moment happened when I had every reason to become the thing that hurt me, and chose not to. That was the real inheritance. And unlike money, nobody can take that away. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, remember this. You don't prove your worth by winning every argument. You prove it by refusing to become the person who tried to break you. Drop a comment telling us where you're listening from. And if this story stayed with you until the end, subscribe to Betrayed Blood for more family betrayal, hidden inheritance, and revenge stories where the truth always finds its way into the light.